Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another dispatch. I am going to finish now the Linda Nochlin essay on Joan Mitchell. So, what a wholesome emotion rage is, or can be. And she's quoting something like, I'm thinking it's Greek. Sing, goddess, the wrath of Achilles. The Iliad starts on a high note of rage, connecting art itself, the singing of the goddess, with heroic anger. Nietzsche extolled the salutary potential of rage above all when it engaged the creative psyche. So did William Blake, who declared, "The tigers of wrath are wiser than the horses of instruction." That's great. Yet how unbecoming rage and the energy generated by it is thought to be when it comes from women. And all too often, women's rage is internalized, turning the justifiable fury they feel against both the social institutions and the individuals that condemn them to inferior status, not onto others, but on themselves, cutting up their own work, making it small, rejecting violence and force as possessions of the masculine ego, hence unavailable to the female artist. Stopping work altogether, speaking in a whisper instead of a roar, becoming the male artist's support system. Silence has always been a viable, indeed, a golden alternative for women artists. The fact that Mitchell, though a woman, could take possession of her rage and, like a man, transform it into a rage to paint was an extraordinarily difficult concept for a male-dominated art world to accept. Yet it would seem to me that rage and its artistic corollary, the rage to paint, are both central to the project of Joan Mitchell. Mitchell herself quite overtly rejected attempts to define her work as feminine, although she came to accept the notion of feminism as a political stance. Her paintings forcefully help establish the notion of a feminine other, energetic, angry, excessive, spilling over the boundaries of the formless, the victimized, the gentle, and the passive, but battling at the same time those other familiar demons, chaos and hysteria, with a kind of risky ad hoc structure. Really great paragraph. God. In a long, rambling, beautifully revealing letter she wrote to me in the late 1980s, Mitchell stated, I have lots of real reasons to hate, and somehow I can't ever get to hatred unless someone is kicking my dog, Marion, true story, or destroying Giselle, a friend, etc., and then I'll bite. I can't go to killing. My dead shrink kept trying to get me there. I've never made it. My, how I loved her. Perhaps Mitchell never thought of herself as angry or enraged. I do not suppose she thought of herself as a heavy drinker either. But then again, neither did the various male artists who depended on rage and alcohol to stimulate their art, or at least to make it possible for them to write or paint and not succumb to darkness and passivity. Recently, however, women have been discovering the specificity of their rage and anger and writing about it. In 1993, in an article entitled Rage Begins at Home, literary scholar Mary Ann Caws differentiated rage from anger, asserting rage is general, as I see it, and is in that way quite unlike anger, specific or motivated by something, which can, upon occasion, be calmed down by some specific solution. beyond what one can state or feel or see. Rage is one of the great marvels of the universe, for it is large, live, and lasting. I have come to treasure my rage, as I never could my anger. My rage possessed and is still undoubtedly possessing me from inside and does not, cannot demand that I control it. Energy comes from and is sometimes indistinguishable from this rage. Unquote. Later, Cause ceased to differentiate between the two, for, as she put it, I believe they have me both. In 1992, in a special issue of Research entitled Angry Women, Andrea Juno, in an interview with Avital Ronell, declared, the only way a woman can escape an abusive, misogynistic relationship is through full-fledged anger. Anger may also be the conduit by which women in general can free themselves from larger social oppression. Ronell responded, anger must not be confined to being a mere offshoot of re-sentimental festering wounds, but must be a channeling or broadcast system that, through creative expression, produces a certain community. That image of a mythical Medusan threat is wonderful. For Mitchell, rage or anger was singular, consuming. When I was with her, I could often feel rage, scarcely contained, bubbling beneath the surface of her tensely controlled behavior. Sometimes it would burst forth, finding as its object a young curator, an old friend. It was icy, cutting, and left scars. Once, when I was staying the night at her house in the country, she had an acrimonious fight with a former partner. It was terrifying. I've never seen or heard a man and a woman so angry at each other. And it went on, mounting in its passion with physical violence always lurking in the background, though it never actually came to blows. I wanted to hide under the table, but I was called upon as a witness to the inquiry of first one, then the other, by the contending parties, mostly by Mitchell herself. Certainly, Mitchell's rage constructed no sense of community or connection between herself and other women. Yet, I think we must be aware of the power of individual anger in women's achievement, as revealed in the work of Mitchell and many others of her generation and after. Without Mitchell's unerring sense of formal rectitude, however, without her daring and her discipline as a maker of marks and images, her work would be without interest. I would like to look now at a series of images that have often escaped careful examination. The 10 original color lithographs drawn on aluminum plates that the artist made in 1981 with master printer Kenneth Tyler. These works are in some ways anomalous in the artist's oeuvre, oeuvre, in that they are small scale and are not executed in oil paint, Mitchell's preferred medium. And yet, for that very reason, because they are, let us say, more approachable, they offer a good starting place to chart the intersection of energy and its articulation in Mitchell's work. The explicit way that meaning comes into being in her imagery. Delicacy, grace, and awkwardness are all present in varying degrees in Mitchell's subtle, non-referential calligraphy. The constant interplay of same and different is crucial in the production of meaning in these prints, which, though visual in every respect, nevertheless share in the distinctive character of language in the way their images are constructed. How do visual structures of similarity and difference come into play in a reading of Bedford 1 and Bedford 3? See if I can find, here's an image in here of Bedford 3. Maybe I can find Bedford 1 too. In both lithographs, a bottom layer, which we see as earth or ground, is opposed to an airier, more lightly applied blue sky area above. Yet the feeling or mood of each of these prints is very different. The vernal lightness, sprouting bounce, and dancing rhythms of Bedford One produce an atmosphere utterly opposed to that of the petulant, indeed outright angry animation created by the more solid facture of the choppy ground element and the fractured sky area of Bedford 3. In another print from the same series, Flower 3, a four-color lithograph, the relationship between more densely worked and more open areas is reversed. Now it is the upper portion of the image that is filled with color and incident and meshed strokes of crayon, while the bottom is sketchily adumbrated by a series of open vertical strokes that leave plenty of leeway for the white paper beneath. Two polarities of Mitchell's style are demonstrated in a later group of prints she created in conjunction with Tyler Graphics. In Sunflowers 2 of 1992, two related images are juxtaposed to form a diptych. The subject is really the relation of the downpouring energy of the crayon strokes. These dark, congested rectangles have nothing in common with Vincent van Gogh's famous flowers, except the palpitating excitement of their facture. And there is something perverse about the title. These are dark sunflowers indeed. The one on the right, with its thick, blotchy smears of blue and green pigment and skinny bent supports, is especially ominous. In Little Weeds 2 of the same date, however, the colors are brighter, the calligraphy dispersed over a broader, emptier, horizontal field, the mood more frenetic, and the dynamic more centrifugal, rather than contained. From the very beginning, Mitchell's rage to paint was marked by a very specific battle between containment and chaos. In Red Painting 2 of 1954, a shivering island of agitation is held in check by the composition's central focus, the amazing dynamism of the brushwork, which pulls together and layers in deep, jewel-colored skeins, Skeins. A close-up detail of the upper central portion of the canvas reveals something of the complexity of Mitchell's facture, the almost excessive bravado of the gestural center compared with the cool pallor of the gridded margins, as though something wild had escaped from a cage or needed to be pent up in one. Mitchell's work has often been compared with that of her contemporaries and immediate predecessors. If we compare Mitchell's untitled canvas of 1956-57 with de Kooning's Woman of 1949-50, we see that she accepted the sweep, the slash, the bravura brushwork of his style, but rejected what is most striking about his image, the figuration. Comparison, of course, can bring out difference as well as similarity. Much is sometimes made of the impact or influences of Mitchell's longtime companion, the Canadian-born abstractionist Jean-Paul Riopelle, on her style. Yet, I think comparison in this case brings out irrevocable difference. Riopelle's patterning is more regular, more aleatory, more all over, of equal density throughout, which gives his work a preconceived rhythmic formula, utterly opposed to Mitchell's poignant visual searching. Agreed. In Mitchell's work, as I am trying to demonstrate, meaning and emotional intensity are produced structurally, as it were, by a whole series of oppositions. Dense versus transparent strokes, gridded structure versus more chaotic, ad hoc construction, weight on the bottom of the canvas versus weight at the top, light versus dark, choppy versus continuous brush strokes, harmonious and clashing juxtapositions of hue. All are potent signs of meaning and feeling. It is this structural freedom and control, this complexity of vision, that accounts for the fact that, far from being a one-note painter, Mitchell explored a vast range of possibilities in her work, from the spreading, ecstatic panoramas to the inward, curdling black paintings, from the totally covered canvas to the canvas enlivened only by a few dashes of calligraphy. Field of Two, 1973, could also be a Rothko. That's it. Here's an image of it. You can see. But a Rothko highly implicated by Hans Hofmann's push and pull. The gridded planes of color hover over and retreat from the surface of the canvas. And what colors they are. Pinks, oranges, a touch of vernal green, and then those great streaks of hovering darkness that so often seem designed to disrupt easy comfort or harmony in Mitchell's best canvases. The diptych and the polyptych formats attracted Mitchell increasingly from the late 1960s on. Of course, the two-part or multipartite format was not her invention. On the contrary, it had had a long history, going back to the religious art of the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, which it often assumed, when it often assumed heroic proportions in the traditional Christian altarpiece. One more page here. More recently, in the 1950s, Pollock made use of both the diptych and the polyptych in a series of dramatic drip paintings in which strings of pigment jumped over barriers and respond to similar formations in their partner paintings. But Mitchell's multi-canvas creations were different from both the religious art of the past and Pollock's more recent essays into the genre. First, they constituted a response to her own need for greater spatial expansiveness, yet an expansiveness that would nevertheless be held in check by the specific dimensions of the individual panels that constituted the object. Secondly, the diptych or polyptych appealed to her because of the more complex relationships it could induce, not just the play of difference and analogy within the single canvas, but response and reaction against another related panel, both like and different. The range of interrelated expressions was vast and open-ended. At times, the notion of landscape and of the topographic almost inevitably enters the mind of the viewer of Mitchell's work. There are titles such as Cloud Field, Weeds, the Lake, or River that conjure up a topographic or landscape experience. The fact that Mitchell lived for a great deal of her mature life in Vetheuil, Vetheuil, on the Seine, with its splendid views already immortalized by Claude Monet, who had lived briefly in the gardener's cottage near her property, increases the temptation to ascribe specific paintings to precise locales. But it is important to keep in mind that almost all of Mitchell's canvases were titled after the fact, not before. Far from being a painter who worked sur le motif like Monet or Cézanne, one might say that Mitchell was a painter who worked the motif in after. She discovered the analogies to some thing, place, idea, or feeling after she had completed the work, not before. Many of the titles are facetious or arcane, like The Goodbye Door or Salut Tam. Some of them are flatly descriptive, like Cobalt or Bottom Yellow. But in all of them, we are aware of what art critic Barbara Rose denominated the struggle between coherence and wild rebellion. That, if anything, is what Mitchell's paintings are about. As such, they constitute a pictorial palimpsest of multiple experiences. They are never perfect, finished objects. From their brazen refusal of harmonious resolution rises their blazing glory. I'm going to read that again. From their brazen refusal of harmonious resolution rises their blazing glory. In a wonderfully suggestive article about Virginia Woolf and Duke Ellington, published in the New York Times, cultural critic Margot Jefferson turned her thoughts to the place of beauty and fury in Woolf's work, explaining that beauty restores and fury demolishes in her novels. The bond between them is so psychically fraught, it remained muted, even subterranean. But Jefferson continued, like grief or longing or moments of transcendence, anger can be changed into something else and made new. She ended her piece by asserting that elegy and fury may exist side by side, beauty and the heart of darkness sharing one language. How apt a description this is of Joan Mitchell's painting at its best, an art in which rage and the rage to paint so often coincide and indeed share the same ever-questing, always unformulaic pictorial language. Great, great essay. Let's do that. All right. There you go. Hope you're all well. Staying cool wherever you are, painting, making stuff, keeping balance. Okay. Be well, everyone. Take care.